Hi everybody, I'm Angie, nice to meet you. And here I'm going to go ahead and teach you guys a little bit about getting your school esports organization recognized. So anyway, a few things about me. I tried really hard to break every branding guideline that I could find in the creation of the slide, but I'm an Army brat. I've moved around all my life, and I think that this whole esports adventure began when I came to the University of Utah. Specifically what happened is I started this little club called Crimson Gaming, and we ended up building one of, I think, the biggest, most motivated, excited group of college esports kids to hit the West. And we were able to persuade over time that there was a want and a need for something higher than just a simple college esports club. So from there we spawned Utah Esports, which was the first varsity esports program in the Power 5 athletic conferences. It was a little difficult. My other experience in the meantime, I host a lot of major online tournaments, primarily through Blizzard Esports TESPA, the college esports arm of Blizzard Esports. And so I participated and helped develop and manage a lot of these tournaments for Overwatch and Hearthstone. Collegiate Rocket League was one of the most exciting developments we were able to do. I was recognized as an NET All-Star, and so I was super honored to receive that recognition and was excited to be recognized alongside Gillyweed and some other really influential ladies in the inclusion and diversity research aspect of esports. I also worked briefly for the Utah Jazz in launching their esports initiatives, and I helped to do a lot of the work in managing and creating kind of an order of operations for their first ever endeavor into esports, which was in the NBA 2K League Jazz Gaming. So I was a manager for that for the last few years, and I currently work in software development. So yeah, also feel free to give me a follow on Twitter if you have any questions or concerns ever. This is Angie, thanks. So I'll give you guys a little bit of the breakdown of the Utah story and how Utah Esports came to be. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the multiple ways that we can get to New York, getting your esports organization recognized. A few pitching and then tips and tricks that I have up my sleeve. So anyway, I told you guys briefly about Crimson Gaming. When I honestly first came to the University of Utah campus, I was looking for like-minded nerds where I could just really hang out, get to know people, have a good time, any other reason you join a gaming club. And I was really surprised to find actually a super exclusive, interesting club of about a dozen people who may or may not have been current students. It was a little ambiguous actually. So it was a little strange, and I felt like I wasn't allowed to say, oh, I really like this new game, League of Legends, or if there was anything too trendy, it was basically, oh, that's too cool for us. It was a really interesting group of like casual elitists, and I didn't really care for that, and I really wanted to change the conversation around gaming and make it truly inclusive to everybody, like no matter what your interest was. I did that by starting off with this League of Legends Student Association for the simple reason that we didn't want other people playing this game all over campus to have to be gaming alone. It was definitely, I think, super weird that this League of Legends phenomenon that was hitting us in 2012, 2013 area, you couldn't walk into the library without hearing like rage typing and people just like grinding out their ranked games. And it was really bizarre to me to see that nobody was playing together or interacting together despite this shared love across like this one game. So we sought to change that. We said, okay, well, I think that gaming can be high achieving. I think that this can be a special third space, so to speak. I think that there are a lot of third spaces that people go to socialize, share ideas, learn new things, make connections. In the past, it was coffee shops, it was churches, schools. And I think today, this gaming media really extended itself to be a new platform. And so I said, let's build that, let's make that. We hit off with a lot of success and just trying to, one, just find a competitive space for people to play and also have places where people could make friends and community connections. Other existing gaming clubs on campus, like our StarCraft club and stuff, started looking at the amount of engagement that we were getting from our community, which the University of Utah is a very commuter school campus, so even if you have free pizza, like it's really hard. It's like pulling teeth to get people to come to events. So they were looking at what we were doing and say, oh, well, how are you doing that? They liked our structure, they ended up emulating it, and we ended up being this kind of like weird gaming coalition that we eventually rebranded into Crimson Gaming, which was your all-inclusive one-stop shop for gaming on campus. So I think that at the end of, I think, my tenure at the University of Utah in Crimson Gaming, we had possibly a dozen different interests that we were catering to, and that would be anything from people who are just diehard League of Legends fans, people who enjoyed StarCraft. We had a CSGO, and we had like a pretty strong FPS group going on. We extended to the FGC. We had a dedicated D&D group, which was pretty cool, and more. Yep, we just kept going, and I think just leveraging the interest that we had and sharing the knowledge that we had and consolidated all of our planning efforts. So, you know, instead of having like 80 different student groups and hoping that they survive, why don't we just compile it under the same umbrella and let us support each other? Enter Utah Esports. This is definitely my favorite picture. I think this was on our great reveal day for the team, and it was a good memory. So probably in about 2013, 2014-ish, a few years ago, time flies, we were hearing whispers that the Pac-12 was very excited in wanting to explore college esports in a more intimate capacity. And we were one of the lucky groups that got to sit down by surprise. I was like, oh, some guy named Larry Scott like wants to have a conversation with us. And I didn't really think much of it. I was like, oh, that's an interesting name. Turns out he's kind of the commissioner of the Pac-12. And so we ended up having to do, we had a great conversation and kind of an impromptu presentation on, you know, what does campus life look like? And what does it look like with regards to life in esports and gaming? And where does the Pac-12 fit in? And how do we feel about things like Title IX initiatives and diversity and inclusion and all this other stuff? It was really interesting how that one conversation could spark so much interest. I think that because the Pac-12 were even considering, I think, entering the space, we were able to, I think, garner a lot of interest and support on campus, most notably through our faculty advisor. AJ Dimmick, right there in the black, is definitely, I think, someone who was an incredible catalyst into making sure that our program got off the ground. He was always a supportive faculty advisor, but he was the key to this perfect storm that was happening on campus. For background, the University of Utah has an incredible games design program. It's nationally ranked, and the University of Utah, in a way, before this esports stuff even came into play, was already very invested in gaming as a research initiative and as an extension to their College of Engineering and those efforts. So one, we had this infrastructure coming on in. Two, we had this incredible community of gamers coming together and throwing these crazy events, showing up to crazy events. I think Riot Games had helped us with another pivotal moment with their ULAW rivalries, where they were essentially trying to recommend, it was a large voting system to find out, okay, which traditional sports rivalry would you like to see on Summoner's Rift? We engaged it. Long story short is we got like 500 members into a room, like with 3 days notice somehow. And I think that was incredibly important to our stakeholders to see the engaged, the passionate audience, and that there was definitely a need and a want for this to happen on campus. BYU, yep, they lost. It was great.
I was there.
Yeah, you were there. I was at BlizzCon, but it was a great event. With the Utah story, I think it was not something that happened overnight. I think that from the view of outside spectators, it was something that seemed like it just appeared, and that we said, oh, have a few meetings, get this to happen. But this was actually the work, I think, of possibly a decade's worth of work with the initiatives of the EAE program, and honestly with the last several years that we were working on Crimson Gaming. And yeah, one day we got the thumbs up and we were able to get support from the Entertainment Arts and Engineering Division, and they adopted us and we became a full-blown varsity esport. That story is very unique to the University of Utah, however. And I want everyone to understand that there's definitely more than one way to get to New York. And the conditions that existed at our campus, even if you had copy and paste the same infrastructure, like some faculty advisor that was in charge of a motivated student group, that you happen to have a game design program that people were already invested in and the campus was already wanting to grow, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to make the correct connection along the way. I think that, I'm not saying that the University of Utah Esports was a happenstance, but it was definitely, I think, a very mountainous occasion, and it was definitely a struggle to get it to that point. We weren't following a template, and I want you guys to understand that there is no single way that is perfect for doing this, and every campus, even if they seem identical in structure at the end of it all, has a different way and method of making it. So the most important thing that you need to consider is your vision and your voice of you, your student leaders, your invested faculty advisors, and also your community on campus. You need to decide, what is your end game? Is it, I want a varsity esports program with scholarships? Like I just want like 35 of my top players to have a partial or full scholarship for school? Is it, I want a community center where I can have not only the ability for students to compete in a higher capacity, but also a place where we can all convene? Is this going to lead to a educational program? There are many classes I think that have been spun up for esports in their own programs. There's no right answer or necessarily wrong answer into what you're looking for and how deep you want to go into it. It's what's best for you. A smaller university that wants to become official in esports will have much different motivations than, say, us at the University of Utah. And also, you'll have different stakeholders also. It's also important to understand that there are different flavors of official varsity status that you can achieve on campus. I think that the most easily achievable, in my opinion, is the recreational club. So if you guys have done much research and compared, what student groups are active on your campus, there's a difference between a bowling club, say, that is a part of your regular student group organization, and a bowling club that is a recreational sport club. So basically the bowling club that is the former is going to be some guys who just really like bowling and a good time. They chill, they get together, they do it, that's it. They just like making use of that. When you talk about recreational club sport, that's where things get a little bit different. Typically, you'll have more branding rights because you're representing your university in competitive play. So usually when you are looking at recreational clubs, that's when you're talking about, we're investing in varsity gear to represent our school. We are trying to start an intramural varsity league or something like that. And those can all be done at a low level, but I would say that while recreational clubs are frequently umbrellaed by the athletics department of your university, they are different things. This is kind of like, there are people who are really into jiu-jitsu and want to start entering competitions. You can start making steps in order to have that become a more popular spectator event. Department sponsored is what the University of Utah and Boise Esports are housed under. English became really hard all of a sudden. So that's in our case. We are housed under the College of Engineering and specifically the Department of the Entertainment Arts and Engineering group. And I think that it's a similar story for Idaho as well. Outside of that, this is the really, really hard one to achieve, honestly, is athletics-sponsored student groups. At that point, you're not a student group anymore. This is a varsity sport. So we have the Marquette Eagles and the RMU Eagles. That was a coincidence. And so Marquette is a really interesting story just because they are actually the first Division I school entirely to be housed under athletics. It's an incredibly rare thing and it's a super awesome achievement for them. RMU, first varsity esports program to really exist at a school in the United States. Yeah, so I just want to get that across the board to let you guys know that there's definitely different varieties that we can dive down. Now, when you're wanting to approach your stakeholders and really get started, you want to make sure you do your research, which I hope is more obvious. But some less obvious things are you definitely want to make sure that you understand your school structure. Who are the important stakeholders on campus? You need to consider your top level administration, and you want to make sure that you understand the motivations behind each of those stakeholders. So in the case of the president is really in charge of, right, the broad view of the university. They're very concerned about the university's reputation, and they care about the long-term vision. Like, where can the university go and how can we be innovators, or what is important to the university's goal and vision. The provost is more or less kind of the day-to-day operations guy. He's more of the short-term goal person. He cares more about anything in and around the classroom. VP of Finance, obviously, they have all of the financial planning around the university at heart, and admissions, development, students, they'll all have separate motivations as well. Development, they worry about alumni relations. You know, how do we bring money to our school? Like, what are the major deals and what are the new business developments essentially that we could have for our school? Admissions, they care about recruiting. And the VP of Students cares about basically anything that is outside of the scope of the classroom, student life and campus recreation and things like that. So these are all people that you definitely want to woo and sway at the top level. And while it may be a little bit harder to get to them immediately, you can frequently go ahead and like look at the departments in which they are housed, and start at a lower management level and kind of work your way up. Eventually, you'll get there. But anyway, always consider their motivations. Other departments that will be relevant to research is going to depend on your vision and your goal for your student group. So with College of Admissions, you want to understand what is important to their admissions process and what students are already being recruited to your campus. If it's engineering, what motivation could an engineering group have? Usually it is actually just research. It's, okay, how can we take what we're learning in the environment of college esports, and how can we apply that to the principles of the group? And they're usually going to want to use that as a recruitment method also. Athletics is a whole nother beast, but you'll also want to know, similar to the primary stakeholders of the campus overall, who's the director, who's their support staff, and get to know what recreational club status means. In my research, recreational club status can definitely vary across campuses on what that means in terms of branding and what that means in officiality and what are even the requirements to get in. And so some may be harder to get into than others, and so it definitely depends on that infrastructure. In any case, you'll want to know those people and also consider what are their motivations. Other sources that you can lean on for this research is other student organizations. So is there like a major group on campus that is also kind of a shining star of being a top level community? Like, what have they done in the past, and what can you do to emulate, or what can you learn from their experiences over years? Go into residence life. If you have a good group of people living on campus, learn what excites them and what motivates them. What do they want to see? How can they help you? And also, rely on your community. Your student members, you should consider to be your army. You need to make sure that your student officers are definitely also invested in this, and you'll definitely want to be transparent as you proceed through any process or any of the next steps that you follow. As always, what are their motivations? What are your student officers' motivations? What are the motivations of your community, and what do they seek to gain from your group? I know I'm beating a dead horse, but what motivates your audience? I think if you don't know that, it's really hard to construct an argument as to how or why people should even support your community on campus. Talking to other students, I think that I've found this idea to be weirdly pervasive. Whenever I think they're asking about the Utah story, or they're asking about, oh, okay, well, obviously I'm a little different. How do I make this happen on my campus? They're looking for an order of operations from me of, okay, apply to be a recreational club. Okay, after you've done that for a few years, ramp up and apply to the next step. And assuming that that's how you're going to get to the top level if, say, their goal is to be housed under athletics. There's only one public Division I university that has achieved that rank of becoming housed under athletics, and that's Marquette. That only happened in the past few months. So, needless to say, there's not exactly a perfect template or a key way that you can always just say, okay, well, I'll just walk down this timeline and I'm eventually going to get an awesome program. There is no order of operations. This is the Wild West, and while I think it is much easier today to navigate this process, which there isn't really a process, as you can see, I think that you should never assume that there's going to be. So when you hear from, I think, more senior officials saying, oh, well, you got to do this first and you got to do that, always consider the alternative. What else can I do if this is really your requirement? What is the step beyond that? So don't assume anything. You have more power than you think, and never take no for an answer. Persistence will always be key, and always remember what motivates your audience and frame your arguments around that motivation. This is a car tire, because I'm telling you guys, you shouldn't reinvent the wheel. There are other people who are also driven to go down this path, and so while they're doing research and perhaps they haven't quite achieved that status or the program that they are wanting to build as a dream, they are great sources of information and definitely understand the environment better than, say, people who've even done it before. Not to say you should also lean on people who've done it before, because I think that we have had relevant enough information just by being their first person through the steps to help you. Don't just lean on student groups that are looking to become official. Lean on just your general information pool and your community of college esports enthusiasts. There are a lot of people who have done similar work, who have had to produce similar numbers, who have had to produce similar arguments. So while it's important to research and really, really understand the environment and scene that you're trying to achieve this in, don't feel like you have to do it all yourself. There's a lot of support out there for you, and just ask and we will help. Now, after you have understood, which is always an ongoing effort, what is important on your campus and who are the important stakeholders and how can we change things, you're going to have to develop a pitch at some point. It might be a super easy PowerPoint thing. It doesn't even have to be a full-on deck. It could just be a very structured conversation. But whatever the case, you should always assume that the person you're speaking to doesn't know anything about esports. They may collectively refer to all consoles in your house as Nintendo. They may not even know that much. But I think it's fine, as long as you understand who you're speaking to and where they're from. It doesn't hurt to break it down and make it simpler. Explain like they're five, don't use technical terms, and try to make comparisons to something they already understand, which is the world of traditional esports. Next, you definitely want to provide scope and scale of the overall scene. You're going to start with big ideas, and then you're going to basically filter that down in this pitch structure to be more relevant to your community on campus. But first, start wide. If you don't know anything about esports, what are the important numbers that they should know? Like, what is the last big hitting event that was so influential? Who are the key players? I heard the NBA is getting into esports, and I hear that the NFL is considering it as well. Find numbers and find representatives. Give them idea of who is relevant in the space, what major leagues are moving, and why do all these people play. Sponsors, I think, are a motivating factor for sure. When people say, oh, there's dollars there, like, ears definitely perk up. You want to discuss sponsors that are endemic to esports and non-endemic to the esports space. So ones that you usually would see if, say, you turned on like the latest Fortnite stream, like maybe you see that, oh, Toyota is a major sponsor of this endeavor. So that would be an example of a non-endemic sponsor that is getting into the space. Endemic, you can think about a lot of hardware providers like Corsair or NVIDIA. Those are additional sources of cash that the university might not understand is even there otherwise. So these are just options and sources for future development. Most importantly, are there any sponsors with local meaning? Especially as major traditional esports routes are getting involved, you'll start to note that there is they're not seeking different sponsors. They're leaning on partnerships that they've already developed to help fuel this endeavor into esports. For example, in my time with the Utah Jazz and Jazz Gaming, America First Credit Union is a great regional bank that spans several states around the West. I think it's basically like Utah, Nevada, Arizona, Idaho. And so they've got hundreds and hundreds of branch locations, and they're a solid business. They're a great credit union on their right, but someone from the East may have never heard of them. America First Credit Union is a major sponsor of the Utah Jazz, and in turn became a major sponsor of Jazz Gaming. So understanding where local sponsors are interested in activating makes your stakeholder very excited, because this is a new source of cash that I didn't know was possible. This is where you want to start, I think, breaking it down into terms that are relevant to your cause and case. So you want to break down the collegiate competitive landscape, talk about this is where the excitement is. These are the major tournaments that are happening. Look, Marquette University, they Division I school. They are housed under athletics now. Like, definitely lean on examples and on our own celebrations as a community to your advantage. If there are any local colleges that have similar esports aspirations or desires, or if you guys are active in the community together or creating activations together, definitely lean on them for support as well, and pull together kind of a brief image of the local college scene, essentially, is what you should do. Next steps after you've hopefully gotten through all this, you've delivered your pitch. Yeah, you've delivered your pitch, and you're looking at, okay, well, I survived this meeting, now what do I do? And I think that this is where a lot of students will tend to falter and get a little stuck, is that they're like, okay, well, I did this, shouldn't they just want to do stuff with me? And that's not necessarily true. As we said before, there's no template, there's no order of operations to follow. So sometimes you need to be the motivator, you need to be the coordinator to make sure this project gets off the ground. So you always assume there's a next step. You assign tasks and say, okay, well, now that we've discussed this, what do we think is most relevant to proceed forward? You want to make a definitive follow-up date, and if they can't commit to anything right away, definitely be annoying and make sure that you get a date within reason. If there is a hard no and people just aren't interested, you can't really force your way in there, and so I'll let you guys know of some more tactical ways that you can get around that. If it's a really positive experience and you guys have a formal proposal ready, it's at this point in time that you definitely want to introduce that to your stakeholder that you're speaking with. Don't take no as an absolute answer, because no's change.